Hi Celeste.
Hello.
I'm Sean. I understand you want to know some more about Finstock's history. Do you have some questions for me?
Yeah.
What's your first one?
For the viewers, how do you know about history? What's your background?
Well, I studied history at Oxford University and I've done a lot of work on the history records of Finstock. And we're working on a project at the moment where we're putting together a book on the history of the village.
Okay. My next question is, are you able to tell me something interesting about Finstock's past?
Yes, Finstock was rather an ordinary place. It was a place where lots of labourers worked on the farm, and there were really no big houses other than Finstock Manor Farm, but that was just a big farmhouse. So the most remarkable thing about Finstock is how ordinary it was. But one of the unusual things is it did have a glove industry where a lot of the mums and the daughters made gloves to be sold. They would be delivered the leather, and the mums would sew by hand the pieces of the gloves together, and then they'd be collected up and taken back to be sold. So Finstock is well known for its glove making.
Thank you. The next question is, has treasure or old relics have ever been found in Finstock?
It's funny, they have actually, yes. In the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, there's a very, very rare Roman coin called the Golden Aureus, which comes all the way from Syria. And I think it's only one of 5 ever found in this country, and one of them was found here in Finstock. And although there wasn't a Roman villa in Finstock, there was one at Fawler, and there certainly was a farmhouse in Roman times, because on the far side of the playing field from the school, near where the pavilion is, when people dig in that area, there's a lot of old Roman pottery, pieces of pottery are dug up from there. So somewhere in that area around the church and the sports pavilion, there was an old Roman farmhouse.
Thank you. For example,
Okay, just read what's on the page. Go on to the next question then.
do you think has Finstock ever had a flag?
Well, not a flag as such, but one of the things that happened in the 19th century when Queen Victoria was the Queen was all of the men of the village came together, because when they were sick from working on the land, if they were ever ill and couldn't work, they didn't get paid. So what the men of the village did, they came together and they paid a small amount in each month into a collection, and then if any one of them was sick from work, they could draw money from that so they wouldn't be poor. And that was called Finstock Friendly Society. And Finstock Friendly Society had a flag, and that flag still survives. It's not in very good condition, but we had a very similar one remade a few years ago now. But there is a flag that still exists. It's blue and gold in colour, which were the colours of Finstock Friendly Society. And their flower, where they decorated for their party each year, they used the horse chestnut flower, the conker tree.
When was Finstock first built?
Well, and that's very difficult to answer. I've mentioned there was certainly a Roman farm here, but it wasn't known as Finstock then, or there's no record of it being known by that name. The first mention of Finstock comes, I think it's in 1270 or 1320, it's around then. around 900 years ago. And that's the first time the name Finstock was mentioned. Do you know what Finstock means?
No.
Finstock comes from an earlier time, which perhaps shows it did exist before, but the wording fin means woodpecker, and stock means a place or a settlement. So Finstock means the place of the woodpecker, and that's where the name comes from. And in the very early days, when it was first known by that name, it just would have been a few small, very small farmhouses, and they burnt wood to make charcoal. They grew a little bit of barley and a little bit of wheat and oats, so grew some corn, and they would have also kept a few animals as well. But it was it wasn't a very high population at that time. It was a very small number of people.
Finally, what did people do before cars were invented?
Well, before cars were invented, for many hundreds of years, the main transport was horses.
Wow.
And they would have different forms of carts to pull behind the horse, but not everyone could afford a horse. So most people actually walked. That was the only way they could get around. The train didn't come to Finstock until the 1850s. So before then, it was always walking, or if you had enough money, you could ride a horse.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
I ask about
You brought some photographs of you as well.
Yeah.
What would you like to ask me about those?
Can you explain the two photographs and then ask the
Well,
questions?
I can't read writing.
Doesn't get the
Anyway,
writing.
this is Home Farm Finstock.
Yes.
That man had a trophy because of the biggest pumpkin.
Yeah.
And this picture of school children taught in what looks like a barn
Okay.
before Finstock School was built.
And would you like me to tell you about those two photographs? Well, I don't know anything about the top one, but I know the man. His name was Arthur Jones. And there's actually two buildings called Home Farm in Finstock. One is at the bottom, just next to the old Methodist chapel, and one is very close to the school. This is the one at the bottom. And it used to be quite common for people to grow vegetables and have competitions. And you can see Mr. Jones there has won a trophy for his pumpkin. Now the bottom photograph, it isn't an old barn, and the children weren't being taught there. That's a picture of the old village hall before the new one was built. And the children are at the front there, and I think it's probably a Sunday school outing. It could be a number of things, but it looks like the Sunday school to me. That building before it was the village hall was actually a glove factory. So the mums used to come there with the sewing machines and would make the gloves that I described before. So this is where the gloving took place, and the building was built in 1929. And it didn't last as a glove factory for very long because it was handed over as a village hall in 1939, just 10 years later.
Thank you. Do you know when these photos were taken?
Not exactly. I would think the top one is probably the 1960s or very early 1970s. Mr. Jones was the chairman of the parish council. And the bottom one, because there's no extension on the side, that's quite early. So I think that's probably the 1930s, the bottom picture was taken.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very interesting.
Thank you.